Alright guys, welcome back to Formula 1 news. Ferrari and Red Bull have both criticised Mercedes' strategy at the Mexican Grand Prix, but Ferrari have also confirmed they are not at all concerned about Mercedes' growth in pace. They still believe that second place in the Constructors is well and truly on, and also implying that they certainly believe that next year's car is going to have a one-up over Mercedes as well. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoy. Subscribe if you're new as always. I would greatly appreciate it. Ferrari have kind of disappeared for the last few races. You guys remember after, I think it was Hungary, where Mattia Binotto said there's no reason why we can't win 10 races from now to the end of the season. Since then, Red Bull have won every single race and probably will win the final two as well on current logic. Firstly, some discussions on the calendar for 2024. Next year's calendar has now been confirmed. The Chinese Grand Prix is definitely in doubt as it stands, but they want to bring in either the Kyalami Grand Prix in South Africa or potentially a Colombian Grand Prix or maybe even a Caribbean Grand Prix, which apparently there have been discussions of. So yes, Stefano Domenicali has been in Colombia lately. So yeah, definitely stay tuned for that one because there might be a very interesting Grand Prix coming in 2024. Apparently though, discussions over a South African Grand Prix at Kyalami are also still ongoing. So somewhat unclear what the calendar is going to be for 2024. I believe that they've kind of said that 24 races is enough, but next season's probably going to be 23. So, you know, Las Vegas is coming in and all that jazz. So yeah, I don't know. There's still questions going on. Is Formula 1 doing what they do right now? Just hopefully it's a proper circuit, not another one of these bloody street tracks. Firstly, on Ferrari then, this is a key talking point going into Brazil, that look, they saved 0.2 of a second on their engines because their engines are absolutely terrible around there. Honestly, they were so far off the pace, it was unbelievable. Like, I mean, they lost, 0.4 in Sector 1 in the qualifying laps, and they were, I think, 7 or 8 tenths and about 8, 9 tenths respectively off the pace of the Red Bull, and a good 6, 7 tenths off the pace of the Mercedes last time out in Mexico. Now, I believe they were considering giving Sainz a new engine for Mexico, but they didn't do it because they thought they could battle with Mercedes. They thought, okay, we'll be on the same pace as Mercedes here, so, let's not give Sainz a new engine, let's battle with them, try and get some points off Mercedes, secure P2 in the Constructors. Turns out that wasn't the case at all, and they were probably better off giving Sainz some sort of penalty, but they turned the engine down by 2 tenths to save it because the Ferrari engine can very easily go boom still, seemingly at any time. What this does mean, though, is that Sainz will be taking a penalty almost certainly in Brazil. Binotto has said it's likely they'll take advantage of the 2-week break to prepare for the last 2 races and give Carlos a new engine. So this is definitely suboptimal for Ferrari because, they could have taken this new engine in Mexico and still probably finished P5, P6. They decided not to. They're going to take it instead in Brazil, where, probably he can still make progress, but again, it potentially gives Mercedes a leg up, especially because their quali pace versus Ferrari's pace on the course of the season has been, obviously Ferrari are massively favoured in that discussion. It's really only been in Mexico where Ferrari were massively off the pace. Now, their strategy has been called into question. Mercedes this past weekend, Red Bull and Ferrari, and even Mercedes themselves, Hamilton, for example, criticising their decisions. Should they have started on the soft tyre? Probably they should have done. Even starting on the mediums, did they make the right call? Probably with Hamilton, maybe not with Russell, as we talked about last night. But Ferrari have actually effectively criticised their strategy, and it is a little bit rich coming out of the Ferrari camp, I can't lie. Maybe Mattia Binotto has a point. Maybe Mercedes don't receive the same criticism that Ferrari do when they make strategy mistakes, but at the same time, Mercedes are 8-time constructor champions in a row. Okay, they do make some mistakes from time to time, but they're not the bottle jobs that Ferrari are, I think is one argument that could be made understandably. And even this in Binotto, Mercedes tyre strategy calls may have cost them 2 wins in a row. Now, it's arguable here in Mexico that yes, not starting on the soft was something that could have cost them the race. Would Verstappen have won anyway? Probably. At the end of the day, they did take the gamble going medium hard, hoping that those mediums of Verstappen and Perez would fall off. They didn't, but it was a gamble they took that might have got them the victory on another day with different temperatures, different tyre degradation, a bit of rain, whatever, who knows. That was a gamble Mercedes took. If they all started on the soft, would they have won with the same strategy of Verstappen? Probably not, but it could have happened. They could have done an undercut, an overcut, whatever the case might have been to gain some advantage. The other race, of course, was in Austin, where at the end of the race, Mercedes put Hamilton on those harder tyres, not the mediums, and Verstappen was able to catch up relatively quickly with those medium tyres on compared to the hards. Now, honestly, again, even Christian Horner's saying this, and he says that's the second weekend in a row they've put that tyre on, and it's cost them a victory. I was quite surprised at that, right? So basically saying that they cost themselves the victory by putting that tyre on. That's not necessarily the case, I think, especially in Austin, because that race they didn't have another medium tyre left. left, they had a used medium tyre, but if they wanted to put a brand new tyre on, it had to be the hard. And Hamilton was obviously pushing very hard on that hard tyre at the Austin Grand Prix, still didn't quite have the pace because the Mercedes round there just wasn't as quick as the Red Bull. It was losing so much time in a straight line that the Red Bull was closing 0.3 of a second a lap just purely on the straights. And Hamilton's hard tyres were basically dead at the end of the race anyway. You saw him sliding around all over the place anyway. And, it was clear that if he'd been on the mediums, his tyres would probably have exploded. So, especially because they didn't have a new set. So, to me, the Austin discussion isn't really too relevant, but it's understandable that, yeah, Mercedes maybe did make a mistake here in Mexico, but still, obviously Horner's going to be Horner and throw jabs at Mercedes where he can, but for Ferrari to criticise, it's like, hang on a second, lads, maybe focus on your own camp before you start criticising elsewhere. He even said this after the Grand Prix and said, look, he's pleased they made the right calls in Mexico. Indeed, they did do the soft to medium strategy, but like at the end of the day, they've had the fastest car in qualifying all year. Yes, not in race pace, but they have the most pole positions all season. Doesn't matter if Red Bull get pole at the last two races. Ferrari have still had more poles this season than any other team, and yet their drivers right now are P3 and P6 in the Drivers' Championship, and they might not even get second in the Constructors, despite having, on the grand scheme of things, a far more dominant car than Mercedes. So, I don't know. Mattia Binotto's correct. They did make the correct call on strategy, but it's one of the first times they've done so, to be honest, so far this season. So, I don't know what you guys think about that, but Ferrari maybe need to focus on themselves a little bit. And even now, they are talking about Mercedes with regard to potential upgrades, right? So, Binotto isn't wrong about this, and he's basically said that he's not concerned about Mercedes' recent progress. Mercedes obviously smoked Ferrari in Mexico, and as he says here, they are developing more than us. We stopped earlier to focus on 2023. This, of course, is the classic Ferrari, we're focusing on next year. They say this every year, and does it work out? Well, maybe not over time. But yes, he described that their Mercedes are developing more than them, and therefore they've stopped their development to focus on next year, and they still believe they can be as competitive as they were previously on a normal track, unlike Mexico, with of course the high altitudes. But still, Mercedes have obviously made massive progress recently and overtaken. I mean, they overtook Ferrari a few races ago in race pace. Now they might have overtaken them in quali pace as well. That's obviously not looking good for Ferrari. But he's saying that look, they decided to focus on next year, which is fair enough. But you could also argue they kind of say this every year and don't necessarily get the results as a result. I mean, this season started so well, and it was looking like they were going to win both championships after the first three races, and very quickly it's fallen apart. And now they're throwing jabs at Mercedes and fighting them for third or second in the Constructors. As he goes on to say, Mercedes has recently developed its car more aggressively. We got out earlier and are concentrated fully on 2023, which is certainly fair enough. But at the same time, Mercedes upgrades they're doing here are not just for this year's car, but also for next year's car, because with the same design and philosophy, Mercedes is saying that bringing these new upgrades is giving them more data and more information and more ideas on what they should do with next year's car. And if they didn't bring these upgrades to this year's car, then next year they wouldn't have quite as good of an understanding. So it's not like Mercedes are necessarily sacrificing next year for this year. They're trying to do both at once. So kind of Ferrari's philosophy here, or ideas, seems to be implying that they're going to be better than Mercedes next year because they're putting more time into next year's car than this year's car. Might not necessarily be true. Intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. But even discarding next year, Ferrari still believe that they are the more competitive car on a race on a normal circuit. Even as Sainz says here, we saw in Austin that at a normal track, we are still on the pace. We are not at the level of Red Bull, but Mercedes certainly does not worry us for the last two races. The gap in the Constructors right now is only about 40 points, so Mercedes need to gain 20 points per race, which is quite a tall order. But you've also got to consider the sprint races are a thing here. So, there are points up for grabs in the sprint. So if Mercedes can do well in the sprint races, they can close that point gap a bit. And if there's a bit of a disaster, if Sainz gets taken out by Russell or whatever happens, those are further points lost. So, the fight for second isn't quite over yet. It could be over after this race, depending on what happens, but it's not over yet. And Sainz is pretty adamant here that Mercedes doesn't worry them for the last two races, regardless of the circumstances. So is this going to come back to bite them to a certain degree, or on at the end of the day, does it really matter? Because Red Bull have won both championships anyway. Is it better, you can argue, for one of these teams to get third, to get the extra wind tunnel testing time that results from that? The teams are obviously going to say they want to fight for seconds, and I'm sure they probably do because of money and stuff like this, prize money, all that. But still, it can be beneficial to come third. And are Ferrari right to kind of dismiss the Mercedes threat? I kind of doubt it, just because, yes, we saw they were way off the pace in Mexico, 6 or 7 tenths of a second away from Hamilton even, and obviously a large chunk of that was down to them turning down the engine, but not all of it, right? They got the setup wrong. The car was an absolute nightmare to deal with. Every time they went over those curbs through the S's, they were having an oversteer moment and almost chucking it into the wall. So intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. A couple of quick things to close out the video with on the tyre warmers, because lots of talk about this lately, because next season the plan is, at least from Formula 1, is to remove the tyre blankets such that when you put new tyres on the car, they're not as warm as they could be. They're just effectively room temperature or whatever, like where they've been sitting in the garage. The issue, of course, with that, the drivers come out the pits with cold tyres. Probably there will be some crashes and some moments. I mean, I'm sure Yuki Tsunoda would bin it in the wall every weekend, unfortunately, if that was to be the case, as he did back in, was it Canada? So, yeah, I don't know. The drivers don't want it, right? Now, the idea is that it kind of, obviously, they cost energy and it would be more sustainable if tyre warmers weren't to be there. And also, maybe it increases the driver's skill involved, but it also kind of eliminates the undercuts, because the idea of an undercut is you pit earlier, get the fresher tyres that are nice and warm coming out of the tyre blankets, do a big lap, and then effectively undercut the other guy. By the time he pits, doing one more lap on the older tyres you've got in front of him. Kind of eliminates that. If your first lap on the new tyres that they're pretty cold, it's going to be a real struggle. So that's why the drivers don't want it, and apparently they're going to effectively not do this anymore. So it's apparently going to be shelved for next year instead, and they might plan some other things instead. So yeah, stay tuned for that one, but apparently tyre blankets are not going to go anywhere yet, although they might have some other ideas in place. Very much intrigued to your thoughts in the comment section below. Hit the like button if you enjoyed, subscribe if you're new, take care, and I'll see you next time.